The night swallowed the Hindu Kush Mountains whole, a darkness so complete it seemed to devour light itself. Lieutenant Michael Ramirez sat motionless in the forward operating base's makeshift briefing room, his eyes tracing the topographical map spread before him. Each contour line told a story of unforgiving terrain, razor-sharp ridgelines, deep ravines that could swallow entire platoons, and hidden valleys that had been the graveyard of countless military operations. Around him, the room buzzed with a quiet intensity that only special operations teams understood. It was the calm before the storm, a moment suspended between preparation and action. Ramirez's team, 4 of the most elite Navy SEALs ever assembled, represented the sharp end of America's counter-terrorism spear. Each man was a specialist, a weapon refined through years of training that pushed human limits beyond what most could comprehend. To his left, Jake Thompson cleaned his weapon with a methodical precision that bordered on meditation. Thompson wasn't just a communications specialist. He was a living communications network, capable of maintaining contact in environments that would reduce standard equipment to useless electronics. His hands moved with an almost musical rhythm, each piece of the advanced communication gear being checked, rechecked, and prepared for a mission where a single moment of silence could mean death. Across the table, Marcus Rodriguez studied satellite imagery with an intensity that seemed to burn through the high-resolution prints. As the team's intelligence specialist, Rodriguez possessed a mind that could deconstruct complex networks with the same ease that most people might solve a simple puzzle. His fingers traced potential routes, alternative approaches, escape paths that existed only in the most intricate calculations of human movement and terrain. The 4th member of the team, Derek Williams, sat quietly in the corner, running through mental simulations. As the team's medical specialist and secondary weapons expert, Williams embodied the SEAL ethos of maximum capability. His medical kit was as carefully prepared as his arsenal, each item selected with the understanding that in the mountains of Afghanistan, he might be the only thing standing between a team member's survival and certain death. Ramirez understood the weight of their mission. The target was Hassan al-Bakri, a high-ranking insurgent leader who had orchestrated some of the most devastating attacks against coalition forces in the past 2 years. Intelligence suggested al-Bakri was planning a major offensive that could potentially destabilize the entire region, putting thousands of civilian and military lives at risk. The briefing had been clinical in its precision. Satellite imagery, signal intercepts, human intelligence, all pointed to a narrow window of opportunity. Al-Bakri would be moving through a series of mountain passes, traveling with a small contingent of highly trained fighters. The mission was clear: locate, identify, and neutralize the target with minimal collateral damage. But Ramirez knew nothing was ever that simple. He studied the faces of his team, men he had trained with, bled with, men who had become closer than brothers. Each of them carried the weight of previous missions, of lost teammates, of a conflict that had stretched across generations. Their eyes told stories of places most Americans would never understand: remote villages, mountain passes, moments where civilization dissolved and pure survival took over. The mission briefing had highlighted the extreme challenges. They would be operating in an area with minimal communication support, terrain that would challenge even their advanced navigation systems, and an enemy that knew every rock, every shadow of the mountain range. Their insertion would be by high-altitude low-opening, high-low jump, a method that would allow them to approach undetected but would require absolute precision. Rodriguez spread additional intelligence reports across the table. Recent chatter suggested al-Bakri was not just moving, but was potentially meeting with other key insurgent leaders. If true, this could be an opportunity to disrupt an entire network of terrorist operations. But it also meant increased risk, more potential combatants, a more complex operational environment. Satellite thermal imaging shows minimal human activity. In the target zone, Rodriguez reported, his voice low and controlled. But we've learned the hard way that these mountains can hide an entire army if needed. Thompson nodded, his fingers already programming encrypted communication protocols that would allow them to maintain contact. In an environment notorious for communication dead zones, we'll be running multiple backup communication channels. Satellite, ground wave, burst transmission. If there's a way to send a signal, we'll find it. Williams checked his medical supplies one final time. Tourniquets that could stop arterial bleeding in seconds. Advanced hemostatic agents, compact surgical tools that could stabilize a critical wound in the most hostile environments. Each item was a potential lifeline, carefully chosen through hard-learned lessons from previous missions. Ramirez absorbed every detail, his mind a constant calculation of variables. Potential entry points, escape routes, contingency plans that branched into multiple scenarios. Years of training had taught him that missions were won or lost in the preparation, long before the first shot was fired. As the final briefing concluded, a heavy silence descended. They all understood the stakes. This wasn't just another mission. This was a critical operation that could save hundreds, potentially thousands of lives. The mountains waited, patient and deadly, ready to test everything they had learned, everything they believed about themselves. The gathering storm was about to break. A mountain-breathed betrayal. One moment, the night was a velvet shroud of silence. The next, it erupted in a savage orchestra of violence. The first bullet cracked through the darkness like a whip, its sonic signature, a death whisper that transformed tranquility into chaos in less than a heartbeat. Lieutenant Michael Ramirez felt more than heard the initial round. A microscopic displacement of air, a nearly imperceptible shift in the mountain's energy. His body read the signs before his conscious mind could process them. Combat wasn't just about training. It was about becoming something more than human. A living sensor tuned to the most minute vibrations of impending danger. Contact, multiple directions. Jake Thompson's voice cut through the explosion of sound, his communication training instantaneously converting instinct into actionable intelligence. The team had trained for this moment thousands of times, but training and reality were two different beasts entirely. The mountainside came alive with muzzle flashes, bright, violent eruptions that punctured the darkness like razor-sharp stars. Ramirez could see the tactical brilliance of the ambush almost immediately. The insurgents hadn't just set up a kill zone. They had created a living, breathing trap that seemed to move and breathe with predatory intelligence. Rodriguez was the first to map the attack vectors. 4 distinct firing positions. He shouted, his voice calm despite the wall of lead tearing through the air around them. Each of those positions was carefully selected, high ground that provided complete coverage, angles that left minimal room for escape or counter-assault. The terrain that had been their potential ally now became their greatest threat. Every rock, every slight depression in the mountain's surface became a potential death trap. The insurgents knew these mountains like they knew their own heartbeats. This wasn't just an ambush. This was a perfectly choreographed dance of death. Derek Williams moved with a fluid grace that defied the chaos around them. His medical kit remained secured, but his secondary weapon was now an extension of his body. Each movement was calculated, providing cover, creating momentary windows of protection for his teammates. In special operations, survival wasn't about individual heroics, but about collective preservation. Ramirez's mind was a supercomputer of tactical analysis. They had anticipated potential resistance, but this was beyond anything their intelligence had suggested. These weren't just random insurgents. This was a coordinated assault by fighters who understood modern military tactics at a level that suggested significant external training. Bullets impacted around them with terrifying precision. Rocks exploded into fragments, sending razor-sharp shards through the air like additional projectiles. The mountain itself seemed to be fighting against them, every surface a potential source of additional injury. Thompson took a round to his tactical gear, the body armor, absorbing the impact, but the kinetic force still sending him momentarily off balance. Damage report? Ramirez's command cut through the chaos, his voice a steel thread of control. Gear holding. Thompson responded, already compensating, his communication equipment miraculously intact. Comms are sporadic, but functional. Rodriguez was already working to identify the specific groups responsible for the attack. Each muzzle flash, each bullet's trajectory told a story. These weren't random fighters. The precision, the coordination, suggested a level of sophistication that pointed to something larger, more organized. The team's initial insertion point was now completely compromised. What had been a carefully planned approach was now a killing ground, every square meter laden with potential death. Ramirez knew their survival depended on immediate, decisive action. Staying static was a death sentence. They needed to create movement, to turn this ambush on its head. Breakthrough vector, 2 o'clock. Williams shouted, identifying a momentary weakness in the insurgents' defensive line. It was a razor-thin opportunity, a breath of possibility in a landscape of certain death. Ramirez's mind calculated a dozen scenarios in milliseconds. Their mission to neutralize al-Bakri now competed with a more immediate objective, survival. But surrender was never an option. Not for SEALs. Not for these men who represented the absolute pinnacle of military training and human capability. The mountain continued its brutal symphony. Bullets, rock fragments, the harsh breathing of men pushing themselves beyond human limits, all blended into a cacophony of survival. Each team member was now a weapon, each movement a calculated risk, each breath a defiance against the overwhelming odds. They were trapped, they were outnumbered, and they were just getting started. The real fight was about to begin. Pain was a language Jake Thompson knew intimately. The bullet that tore through his shoulder wasn't just a wound. It was a conversation between flesh, will, and survival. He'd felt this before. The initial shock, the white-hot burst of sensation that threatened to overwhelm every other sense. But SEALs didn't know the meaning of surrender. His left arm hung useless, a dead weight that sent sharp tendrils of agony through his body with every minute movement. Blood soaked through his tactical gear, creating a crimson map of survival against the dust-gray mountain terrain. Thompson's medical training kicked in with mechanical precision. Even wounded, he was a weapon, a resource, a critical component of the team's survival. One-handed, he accessed his field medical kit. Hemostatic gauze, applied with a practiced touch that spoke of countless training scenarios and real-world applications. Compression, pressure, control, each movement a deliberate act of defiance against the body's natural impulse to shut down. The wound was serious, but not fatal. Not today. Not on this mountain. Lieutenant Ramirez's eyes never left Thompson. A split-second assessment that communicated more than words ever could. In special operations, injury wasn't just a personal challenge. It was a team vulnerability. Rodriguez was already repositioning, creating a protective arc that would minimize Thompson's exposure while maintaining their defensive capabilities. Status? Ramirez's voice was granite, hard, unyielding, demanding absolute honesty. Thompson's response was immediate. Functional, shoulders compromised. Weapon and comms still operational. Each word was a testament to discipline, to the training that transformed human beings into something beyond ordinary limits. The mountain continued its relentless assault. Bullets carved intricate patterns around them, rock fragments becoming secondary projectiles that turned the environment itself into a weapon. Derek Williams moved with a predatory grace, his medical expertise now as critical as his combat skills. He knew Thompson's wound required immediate attention, but immediate in this context meant something entirely different from a civilian medical scenario. Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos, a lifeline of tactical intelligence. Multiple. Hostiles, approximately 200 meters, ridgeline southeast. Counting at least 6 confirmed positions. Potential for more. His hands worked simultaneously, mapping terrain, tracking movement, identifying potential breakthrough points. The communication systems became a lifeline. Thompson, despite his wound, continued to manage their encrypted channels. Each burst transmission was a calculated risk, sending out minimal information while preventing enemy interception. Their survival depended on maintaining communication without revealing their exact position. Ramirez understood the mathematics of their situation. Outnumbered, wounded, surrounded. But mathematics in combat was more than simple arithmetic. It was about will, about turning disadvantage into opportunity. "We're not just surviving," he muttered, more to himself than to the team. "We're fighting back." Williams moved to Thompson, his examination swift and professional. The bullet had entered at an angle, missing critical arteries by millimeters. A fraction of an inch in any direction would have been fatal. He administered a rapid-acting morphine, derivative pain management that would keep Thompson functional without dulling his combat effectiveness. Through and through, Williams confirmed. Clean exit wound. Minimal internal damage. In their world, these words were almost a celebration. Thompson managed a grim smile. Just another day at the office. The team's communication was a language beyond words. A slight movement of a hand, a microsecond of eye contact. Entire strategies were communicated in moments that would appear meaningless to an outside observer. They weren't just a team. They were a single organism, each member a critical component of a living, breathing survival mechanism. Rodriguez's tactical overlay continued to update. The insurgents weren't just attacking. They were probing, testing, looking for weaknesses. Each bullet, each movement was a reconnaissance, an attempt to understand the team's capabilities, their potential response vectors. But they had chosen the wrong team to underestimate. Ramirez began to formulate a counter-assault strategy. The mountain, which had been their ambush point, would now become their weapon. Every piece of terrain, every rock, every slight depression became a potential tactical advantage. "Prepare for movement," he commanded. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute authority. Thompson, wounded but unbroken, checked his weapon. Williams secured additional medical supplies. Rodriguez continued his tactical mapping. And Ramirez? Ramirez prepared to turn this ambush inside out. The mountain held its breath. The real fight was about to begin. The mountain was alive with a predator's patience. Ibrahim al-Hashimi wasn't just a sniper. He was a ghost, a phantom etched into the very geology of the Hindu Kush. For 17 years, he had hunted, first against Soviet forces, then against American troops, his skills honed by generations of mountain warfare that ran deeper than blood, deeper than ideology. His current position was a masterpiece of camouflage and calculation. A natural crevice in the rocky ridge, barely wider than his shoulders, provided a perfect firing position. Layers of local stone and carefully applied camouflage paint made him indistinguishable from the mountain itself. Decades of experience had taught him that true invisibility wasn't about disappearing, but about becoming so integrated with the landscape that perception itself broke down. The Advanced Accuracy International AWM sniper rifle lay before him, a precision instrument. That was more an extension of his body than a mere weapon. Each component had been meticulously maintained, cleaned, and calibrated. The scope, a custom-modified piece that represented the pinnacle of optical technology, allowed him to see with impossible clarity. Wind patterns, atmospheric conditions, the minutest terrain variations, all became readable language to him. Although the American Special Forces team moved with a precision that demanded respect. Ibrahim had watched countless military units traverse these mountains, but these were different. They moved like the mountain itself, organic, adaptive, each member a living component of a larger, more complex organism. His target wasn't just about killing. It was about breaking their spirit, about creating a psychological wound that would run deeper than any physical injury. Rodriguez was the first to sense something was different. Years of tactical training had heightened his perception beyond normal human limits. Something in the mountain's energy had changed, a stillness that spoke of potential death more eloquently than any sound could. "We're being watched," he muttered to Ramirez, his voice barely a whisper. Ramirez understood immediately. In special operations, intuition wasn't mysticism. It was survival. The fine hairs on the back of his neck confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. The mountain had become a living predator, and they were its prey. Ibrahim's finger rested against the trigger with a stillness that defied human limitation. He wasn't just waiting to shoot. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Each breath was controlled, each heartbeat measured. Military snipers were trained to be machines, but Ibrahim was something more, a human weapon refined by decades of conflict. Thompson, still managing his shoulder wound, began to set up additional communication equipment. His movements were calculated, each action designed to minimize exposure. A team knew they were in a kill zone. Every movement could be their last. The psychological warfare was as intense as the potential physical confrontation. Ibrahim understood something fundamental about combat that went beyond simple killing. It was about breaking will, about creating a moment of absolute vulnerability. Williams continued to monitor Thompson's wound, his medical kit open but secured. In their world, being prepared meant being ready for anything, a potential surgical intervention, a sudden evacuation, or a fight to the death. Then came the waiting. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Ibrahim's world condensed to the crosshairs of his scope, to the breathing patterns of the American team. He wasn't just watching. He was analyzing. Every movement, every slight shift of weight, every communication gesture became a potential a potential opportunity. Ramirez felt the mountain's predatory intention. Something was hunting them, not just the general insurgent forces they had anticipated, but something more precise, more deadly. A sniper who understood that true hunting wasn't about the shot, but about the moment before the shot. Rodriguez continued his tactical mapping, his fingers moving across digital interfaces that translated terrain into potential survival strategies. But even his advanced systems couldn't detect the ghost that watched them with impossible patience. The wind shifted, a microscopic change that would mean nothing to most. But to Ibrahim, it was a language, a communication that required immediate calculation. Wind speed, direction, altitude, each variable became a mathematical equation that he solved with inhuman precision. Thompson's communication equipment picked up fragmentary signals, encrypted bursts that suggested additional movement in the surrounding terrain. But these were deliberately placed distractions, carefully designed to mask the true threat. Ibrahim waited. The mountain held its breath. The perfect moment was coming. Khalid Ahmadzai had been watching longer than anyone knew. A local Afghan scout with a history more complex than the mountain ranges he called home. Khalid represented something far beyond a simple operative. His allegiance was to survival, to his people, to the possibility of peace that existed in the razor-thin spaces between conflict. For 3 generations, his family had navigated the treacherous political landscapes of Afghanistan. His grandfather had fought against the Soviets. His father had survived the Taliban's brutal regime, and Khalid had found himself in an even more complicated world, working with American special forces while maintaining connections to local tribal networks. The American SEAL team wasn't just another group of foreign fighters to him. They represented a potential, a fragile hope, for stability that his people had been denied for decades. And right now, they were about to be systematically destroyed. From his hidden observation point, Khalid's modified accuracy, International AX-50 sniper rifle, a gift from American Special Ops trainers during a joint training mission years ago, was trained on the developing conflict. His spotter's scope, a high-end piece of equipment that represented years of accumulated trust and cooperation, provided crystal-clear visibility of the unfolding ambush. Rodriguez was the first to sense a shift in the mountain's energy. His tactical overlay began picking up microscopic changes, subtle disturbances in the terrain that didn't match the existing threat matrix. Years of intelligence work had taught him that the most critical information often came from the spaces between data points. "Something's changing," he muttered to Ramirez, his voice a low, controlled frequency that carried volumes of unspoken concern. Lieutenant Ramirez understood immediately. In special operations, intuition wasn't mysticism. It was survival. The fine hairs on the back of his neck confirmed Rodriguez's assessment. The mountain had been a predator, but now something else was emerging. Khalid's finger rested against the trigger with a stillness that defied human limitation. He wasn't just waiting to shoot. He was waiting for the perfect moment. Each breath was controlled, each heartbeat measured. This wasn't about killing. This was about preservation. The insurgent sniper who had been controlling the battlefield represented more than just an immediate threat. He was a linchpin in a larger network of operations that had been systematically destroying any hope of stability in the region. Khalid had been tracking this particular operative for months, understanding the intricate web of connections that made him far more dangerous than a simple shooter. Thompson, still managing his shoulder wound, began to set up additional communication equipment. His movements were calculated, each action designed to minimize exposure. The team knew they were in a kill zone. Every movement could be their last. Williams continued to monitor Thompson's condition, his medical kit open but secured. In their world, being prepared meant being ready for anything: a potential surgical intervention, a sudden evacuation, or a fight to the absolute limit of human endurance. The shot, when it came, was unlike anything the battlefield had seen. A single round, placed with surgical precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The insurgent sniper, Ibrahim al-Hashimi, had been so perfectly positioned, so completely integrated with the mountain's topology, that his neutralization seemed impossible. But impossible was a word that held no meaning in this terrain. Khalid's shot was more than a simple act of elimination. It was a message. A statement about the possibility of intervention, about the complex network of local operatives who understood that true peace wasn't about taking sides, but about creating space for survival. The mountain went silent. For a breathless moment, the entire battlefield seemed to hold its collective breath. The insurgent sniper crumpled. His reign of terror ended in an instant that seemed to stretch into eternity. Rodriguez's tactical systems began to recalibrate. The sudden neutralization of the primary threat created a cascade of tactical opportunities that moments before had been unimaginable. "Target down," he reported, his voice a mixture of professional detachment and genuine surprise. Ramirez's response was immediate. "Verify. Confirm neutralization." The team's training kicked in, years of operational protocols, transforming potential chaos into a controlled response. They had been hunted, and now the hunter had been removed from the equation. But Khalid Ahmadzai was already moving. His role wasn't about recognition. It was about survival, about creating possibilities in a landscape that had known nothing but conflict for generations. The mountain held its breath. The real fight was about to begin. Momentum in combat was more than physical movement. It was a psychological weapon. Lieutenant Michael Ramirez understood this fundamental truth with every fiber of his being. The death of the insurgent sniper had created a microscopic window of opportunity, a moment where chaos could be transformed into calculated violence. His team wasn't just going to survive. They were going to turn the tables. Execute Alpha Protocol. Ramirez's command was a razor-sharp whisper that carried the weight of years of training. Rodriguez's tactical overlay came alive. Complex algorithms calculated potential threat vectors, escape routes, and counter-assault. Possibilities faster than any human mind could process. Each pixel represented a potential life or death decision, a mathematical dance of survival. Thompson, despite his shoulder wound, moved with a fluidity that defied human limitation. His communication equipment became a weapon, jamming frequencies, sending false signal bursts that would confuse and disorient the remaining insurgent forces. Every burst transmission was a calculated lie, a psychological warfare tool designed to shatter the enemy's perception of reality. Multiple hostiles. Still active, Rodriguez reported, his voice a clinical assessment stripped of emotion. 3 confirmed positions. Potential for 2 additional hidden units. Williams had already transformed from medical specialist to combat asset. His medical kit remained secured, but his secondary weapon was now an extension of his tactical consciousness. Each movement was a calculated risk, providing cover, creating momentary windows of protection, turning defense into offense. The mountain, which had been their death trap, was about to become their greatest weapon. Ramirez's mind worked with computational precision. The insurgents had planned a perfect ambush, but they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the adaptability of his team. Special forces weren't just soldiers. They were living systems of tactical intelligence, capable of transforming disaster into opportunity in milliseconds. Breach vector, 2 o'clock, Williams called out, identifying a momentary weakness in the insurgents' defensive line. It was a razor-thin opportunity, a breath of possibility in a landscape of certain death. The team moved as a single organism. Years of training had transformed them beyond individual capabilities. They were a living, breathing tactical system, each member a critical component of a survival mechanism that defied conventional understanding of human potential. Rodriguez's digital overlay began to paint the battlefield in real time. Heat, signatures, potential movement vectors, terrain analysis. Everything became a weapon of information. The insurgents had believed they were hunting, but now they would learn the true meaning of being hunted. Thompson's communication jamming created a psychological warfare zone. False signals deliberately placed electronic breadcrumbs that would send the remaining fighters into a state of complete tactical confusion. In special operations, breaking the enemy's will was often more effective than breaking their bodies. Williams moved with a predatory grace that belied his medical background. Each step was a calculated risk, each movement designed to create tactical opportunities. His medical training wasn't a limitation, it was an additional layer of tactical awareness. He understood human vulnerability at a level that transformed medical knowledge into a combat asset. The first insurgent response came quickly, but predictably. Ramirez had anticipated their reaction, had already calculated their most likely movement patterns. Where they saw a counterattack, he saw a carefully designed kill zone. Concentrating fire, Rodriguez reported, his voice a calm center in the storm of violence. The team's weapon systems were more than simple firearms. They were precision instruments, each round a mathematically calculated projection of tactical intelligence. Night vision systems transformed the darkness into a readable landscape, every shadow a potential source of information. Thompson's shoulder wound became irrelevant. Pain was just another piece of information, another variable in the complex equation of survival. Military training had transformed human limitations into opportunities. Ramirez understood something fundamental about combat that went beyond simple survival. This was about sending a message, about demonstrating that no ambush, no matter how perfectly designed, could break their will. The mountain seemed to hold its breath. The insurgents were about to learn a brutal lesson about the true meaning of special operations. This wasn't just a counter-assault. This was a transformation of the entire battlefield. Dawn approached like a bleeding wound across the mountain's horizon. Extraction was never simple. But for this SEAL team, simple had ceased to exist hours ago. Captain Marcus Rodriguez's digital tactical overlay flickered, a testament to the brutal punishment their equipment had endured. Each pixel represented a potential lifeline, a mathematical calculation of survival that danced between hope and absolute destruction. The rescue helicopter was more than a machine. It was their last thread of survival, a mechanical angel battling through a storm of ground fire that would have sent lesser pilots retreating into the safety of the sky. Lieutenant Michael Ramirez understood the brutal calculus of their situation. 2 team members were critically wounded. Thompson's shoulder injury had progressed beyond a simple combat wound. Infection was now a silent enemy more dangerous than any insurgent bullet. Williams had taken shrapnel to his leg, a wound that would have incapacitated a lesser operator, but merely transformed him into a more focused weapon. Incoming bird, Rodriguez reported, his voice a controlled frequency that carried volumes of unspoken tension. 30-second window. Absolute precision required. The mountain had become a living entity. Every rock, every slight depression, a potential source of death. The remaining insurgent forces weren't defeated. They were regrouping, preparing for one final devastating assault that could turn their extraction into a massacre. Derek Williams continued to provide cover fire, his medical training transforming each movement into a calculated risk. Pain was just another piece of tactical information. His leg wound sent sharp tendrils of agony through his body, but years of training had taught him that human limitation was nothing more than a suggestion. Jake Thompson, despite his compromised shoulder, managed the communication systems with a precision that defied his physical condition. Each encrypted burst transmission was a lifeline, a digital thread connecting them to potential salvation. The helicopter approached with a predatory grace that spoke to years of special operations training. Its pilots weren't just flying a machine. They were conducting a surgical intervention in the most hostile environment imaginable. Every rotation of the rotor blades was a calculated risk. Every adjustment a potential difference between survival and total destruction. Ramirez's mind worked with computational precision. The extraction wasn't just about getting his team out. It was about sending a message. About demonstrating that no terrain, no ambush, no combination of circumstances could break their operational capability. Suppress right flank. Rodriguez's call cut through the chaos. His tactical overlay identifying a concentration of insurgent forces preparing a final defensive position. The mountain erupted in controlled violence. Williams suppressing fire created momentary windows of opportunity. Each round was a precisely calculated projection of tactical intelligence. Night vision systems transformed the darkness into a readable landscape, every shadow a potential source of critical information. Thompson's communication systems became a weapon of psychological warfare. False signals, deliberately placed electronic. Breadcrumbs that would send the remaining fighters into a state of complete tactical confusion. The helicopter's approach was a dance of absolute precision. Rotors carved through the thin mountain air, creating a thunderous symphony that was both salvation and potential destruction. Its pilots understood something fundamental about special operations extraction. Hesitation was death. Ramirez moved with a fluidity that defied human limitation. Each step was a calculated risk, each movement designed to create tactical opportunities. For his wounded teammates, they would not leave anyone behind. Not today. Not ever. Prepare for immediate extraction. The command cut through the chaos like a surgical instrument. Williams continued to provide cover, his medical training transforming each movement into a calculated risk. Thompson managed communication systems that were now more weapon than equipment. Rodriguez's tactical overlay continued to map potential threats with inhuman precision. The mountain held its breath. 30 seconds stood between them and potential salvation, or total destruction. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center existed in a world between silence and survival. Lieutenant Michael Ramirez sat in the sterile waiting area, his body physically present, but his mind still traversing the mountains of Afghanistan. The fluorescent lights seemed too harsh, too clinical, after the muted tones of battlefield survival. His hands, which had commanded life and death with surgical precision just days ago, now seemed almost foreign, clean, unmarked, betraying nothing of the extraordinary events that had transpired. Jake Thompson's recovery room was a testament to human resilience. The shoulder wound that could have ended a lesser operator's career was already showing signs of remarkable healing. Military medicine had become an art form of reconstruction, of turning potential career-ending injuries into mere chapters of a larger story. Derek Williams had already begun physical therapy, his leg injury transforming into another challenge to be conquered. The medical staff had learned quickly not to use words like limitation around special operations personnel. For them, recovery wasn't a process, it was a mission. Marcus Rodriguez sat nearby, his tactical tablet open, compiling the mission report that would never fully capture the true essence of what they had experienced. Intelligence reports were clinical, sanitized. They could never translate the raw humanity of survival, the microscopic moments that separated life from death. The classified debriefing had been comprehensive, yet incomplete. They all understood the nature of their work. Some stories were never meant to be fully told. The elimination of the insurgent network they had disrupted would create ripples far beyond this single mission. Intelligence suggested they had prevented a coordinated attack that could have claimed hundreds of lives. But survival wasn't about numbers. It was about moments. About Khalid Ahmadzai, a local scout whose unexpected intervention had turned their potential massacre into a survival story. His complex network of relationships, his understanding of a landscape that defied simple political boundaries, these were the true weapons of modern conflict. Thompson was the first to break the silence. "We're not just survivors," he said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared experience. "We're witnesses." Ramirez understood immediately. Their mission was more than a tactical success. It was a testament to human capability, to the extraordinary potential that existed in the razor-thin spaces between training and instinct, between individual survival and collective purpose. The medical staff moved with a practiced efficiency that spoke to years of treating special operations personnel. They understood something fundamental. These weren't just patients. These were operators who had rewritten the potential of human endurance. Williams' medical background provided a unique perspective. Each wound, each recovery trajectory was a story of adaptation. The human body wasn't just a biological system. It was a living testament to survival, to the capacity to transform trauma into strength. Rodriguez continued his meticulous documentation. But between the lines of his report, there was something more, a recognition of the complex human network that had made their survival possible. The local scout, the helicopter pilots, the communication specialists who had maintained their lifeline, survival was always a collective endeavor. Ramirez thought about Ibrahim al-Hashami, the insurgent sniper who had nearly ended their mission. In another world, another context, they might have been colleagues, partners. The mountain didn't care about ideology. It cared only about survival. The psychological evaluation would be comprehensive. They would be tested, analyzed, evaluated. But they all knew the true evaluation happened in those moments between life and death, in the microscopic decisions that transformed potential defeat into survival. Their mission would become another thread in the complex tapestry of modern conflict. Classified, sanitized, reduced to intelligence reports and strategic assessments. But they would remember. They would know the true story. A story of brotherhood. A story of survival. A story of human potential that defied every conventional understanding of limitation. The mountain would keep its secrets, but they would carry the truth. And in that truth, they had found something more powerful than any weapon. They had found themselves.